There's a lot of developers out here in Denver that are enormous and they do things all over the country. We kind of think of ourselves as being a little more nimble, a little bit more opportunistic, a little more willing to do things outside of the box that the larger players don't have an interest in doing. So it forces us to get creative, to differentiate both from a business strategy standpoint and also aesthetic and product standpoint. We see value in being creative and doing things that other folks aren't necessarily doing or willing to do. We see development as something that is not just a financial vehicle or an investment, but something that fundamentally changes cities for good or bad. We see that as a pretty big responsibility. We start with the perspective of, is this somewhere that I would want to go? Is this a food and beverage outlet that I think I would go to if it were in this neighborhood? Is this a type of multifamily that I would lease, I would go and live at if it were in existence? And so that's the foundation of where we start when thinking about future development.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Design Development, your hub to learn direct from top performers in real estate development, design, and construction. I'm your host, Renz Hayes, founding partner of H&O Lifelong Learner, and I am personally obsessed with high-powered organizations and the leaders that guide them. If this is your first time listening, thanks so much for joining us. And if you're a returning listener, can't thank you enough. Let's go. Today's guest on Design Development is Andrew Katz. He's the co-founder of Katz Development. They're a family-owned commercial real estate development company. They're focused on high design, urban design, and really emphasize decarbonization. So they like to use things like mass timber and energy efficient systems. We're going to learn a little bit about Andrew's story, his background in brokerage. He moved from Ohio to Denver, loves the Denver area, loves Colorado. Their key development, the thing they're most known for right now, is return to form. They're developing Denver's tallest mass timber building at 12 stories. And it's really a cool story. What was the strategy behind it? Why mass timber? Site selection, the numbers. It's going to be a great development. I can't wait to see it built and complete. If you know anyone in commercial real estate development interested in decarbonization, mass timber, or just general strategy of how to make these developments work, this episode's a can't miss. Please share it with them. And without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Andrew Katz. Please join me in welcoming Andrew. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Andrew, I'm really excited to share your story and personally get to know more about you today. You are developing Denver's tallest mass timber building, and everyone knows I'm into mass timber, but I think it's quite entrepreneurial. You're pioneering almost in a new space, but you're going vertical in a neighborhood in Denver. So I want to share your story today. Could you help me tell the audience who you are, what's your background, and a little bit about this development?
Sure. So my name's Andrew Katz. I'm with Katz Development. We're a small family-owned development company. It's just myself, my younger brother Adam, and our dad Scott. We're from Cincinnati, Ohio originally, which is where our dad's been developing for the last 30 years or so. Moved out to Denver the last 7 or 8 years, I think 2015, and have just been focused on doing some fun projects out here.
You were a broker to start your career, is that correct?
Yeah, when I first moved out here, I started in retail brokerage with a group called Sullivan Hayes. My number one goal back when I was moving here was to just find a reason to be here, get a job. Knew I wanted to be in real estate. Brokerage was where my dad started, and I was just following in his footsteps and thought it would be a good starting point, and it was a phenomenal starting point. I loved the group that I was working with at Sullivan Hayes. They're all incredible people. I spent about 2 years there. Had a blast, learned a ton about the city. You're constantly driving around and looking at sites and learning street names, and I had never been to Denver really before I moved here, so that was pretty helpful. And then, learning the fundamentals of deal structure, and it was pretty specific to retail at that point, but also learning land deals and just generally how deals come together was pretty helpful at that point in my career. And then also had the opportunity to just meet a ton of really interesting people from tenants, from landlords, from developers, designers, construction folks, architects. It just got me exposure to the whole industry really.
As a retail broker, could you talk a little bit about the day-to-day? What's your focus as a retail broker? Is it new buildings for developers to purchase, or are you part of the lease up? How does that work?
It's a great question. I was figuring out the day-to-day kind of every day. What's different for me as a young broker, you don't really know. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have any idea what I was doing to the last day that I was a broker, but it was focused on just being opportunistic, whether it was working with tenants. I would work with the team, and the team above me, the senior folks, would have relationships with tenants or with landlords, and I would essentially help them with whatever obligation or whatever assignment they were working on, whether it was working with a tenant, trying to find them specific space, working with a landlord, trying to find them a specific user. I got really interested in land deals, and so trying to dig up off-market deals and track down landowners and see if they had interest in selling, and trying to pair them up with developers who wanted to buy in that neighborhood. It was kind of all across the board,
Very
but
cool.
basically it's a really entrepreneurial kind of opportunistic type of day-to-day.
It sounds like it. You got to create your own luck.
Yes, there's nothing being handed to you as a broker.
Moving to Denver, so you're there 5 or 7 years and you kick off as a broker, but it really helps you learn the city. If I think of my own experience, even in Boston, I've lived in greater Boston my entire life, but the streets that I know in Boston are the ones that we've done projects on, and the other streets, I couldn't tell you what their names are. And even in my own town, like I moved to a new town 7 years ago, I don't know all the streets in the town, but now I start to as my kids are getting older and we have friends on different parts of the town. But before then, you don't know where you're going or what the unique pockets or how neighborhoods are different than others, right?
Yeah, totally. I learned Denver in the first 6 or 8 months better than I knew Cincinnati, which was my hometown, from a street standpoint. You're just constantly in the car driving, and you learn the city really well, really quickly.
And so Katz Development, your father is still developing in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Yep.
And are you guys focused on the same type of development deals in Cincinnati and in Denver?
It depends, sort of. I'd say recently, yes. The last project my dad was involved in was a multifamily high-rise down in the Arts District of downtown Cincinnati, which was super relatable to the project we're working on in Denver. But his career has been all over the board. He started in retail development, doing a lot of ground up, suburban 10,000 square foot strip centers in neighborhoods all over Ohio and that tri-state area, building for Chipotle's and Paneras, and really started in that retail space, and then kind of moved all across asset classes from there. I think he's done a lot of industrial stuff from an ownership standpoint, and then shifted into some value add multifamily, and then most recently he was involved in that ground up multifamily deal. So his experience was all over the board, and then ours out here in Denver is kind of adjacent to, but we're finding our own way out here.
So you grew up in Cincinnati. What was life like in the Katz house? It's you and your brother Adam, you said?
Yeah, we have another brother, Daniel, who's in between us.
All right. Wants nothing to do with real estate?
Real estate's way too slow for him. He's in the much more exciting startup world, and so he just for a plug for him, he owns a company called NoCal, which makes protein bars and natural food products, and so
that's really cool.
Protein bar, NoCal.
Very entrepreneurial family.
Yeah, for sure. We learned it from Dad, who's the ultimate entrepreneur. At least for me, I don't know if I'm speaking for my brothers, but he's been my hero since growing up. I always looked up to him. I always wanted to do what he was doing and be like him one day. And so that was kind of the goal from early on. And then, household was chaotic. 3 boys, suburban Cincinnati.
Clearly your dad had a big influence on you. Where did you go to school?
Went to Ohio State, Columbus.
I was wondering if you were going to say the Ohio State University. That's how they say it, right? When we introduce the players.
We're really annoying. I don't know. Yes, it is the Ohio State. I'll say that.
And so you went to college knowing real estate was going to be your career.
Yeah, I kind of had it planned out from a really early age. I always wanted to go to Ohio State. I think I was 3rd or 4th generation. Just everyone in our family seemed to have gone there. And so grew up a Buckeye, still a huge football guy, watching Ohio State every Saturday. Um, yeah, that was always the goal, was go to Ohio State, go to business school, and then do real estate. And I knew I wanted to be in development. I probably knew pretty early on too I wanted to be in Colorado. And so, yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of exploration
What
going
drew
on.
you to Colorado and Denver in particular?
We were really lucky growing up to have taken some family trips out here to go skiing and hiking. That was always the best part of the year. I loved skiing. I learned how to ski on a tiny little hill in Indiana called Perfect North. And so it was always really exciting to come out to Colorado and, see what real mountains were like, and tried our hand at climbing some 14ers in the summers. And it was always just like the best time of the year. I just loved being out there. I loved the mountains. I loved everything about the outdoor lifestyle here. I didn't know anything about Denver. I knew I could do real estate anywhere. I knew that I wanted to do it somewhere near the mountains. Denver just made sense. I didn't know the city at all. It was brand new when I moved there. I never spent time there on trips. We would always drive through and go straight to the mountains. And so it was really just all centered around the outdoor lifestyle, and knowing that Denver was probably a fun city to be in, but didn't really know what to expect till I got here.
It seems like a lot of people had the same feeling as you. Over the last 10 years, I feel like the population in Denver has grown exponentially. There's people flooding to Denver.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think about just the geographical things that we have around us. I mean, people from all over the world come to Colorado for the mountains and for everything that it has to offer west of Denver. And it's just pretty incredible that we have this really interesting dynamic city, like right at the foothills of world-class nature.
One thing I never understood about Denver that seems pretty appealing is the weather in Denver seems to be pretty great almost year round, despite the massive amounts of snow you get in the nearby mountains.
Yeah, it's kind of a secret. Well, not really, but everyone assumes Denver is the same weather pattern as the mountains. And
I did for sure.
yeah, right.
Last year.
Yeah, a lot of people, when I moved to Denver, they were like, wow, you're just going to be in the snow all the time. It's like, it's really, really mild and different from the mountains. It was 80 degrees all last week. It's 300 and plus days of sunshine. Today's actually a rainy day that reminds me of Cincinnati a little bit, but it's rare. It's kind of like a nice surprise when you get a rainy day. We get our snowstorms, but they all melt, 3 days later. Warm. Yeah.
You knew you were going into real estate. It seems like you knew you were going into real estate development, given your exposure to that at a young age.
Mm-hmm.
Was the drive to be a broker intentional? Were you trying to gain a specific type of experience before becoming a developer?
Yeah, definitely. It was to learn the city. It was to learn the players, and it was to just shore up the fundamentals of deal making, and just make sure that the entrepreneur kind of lifestyle was truly something I was interested in.
Sure.
A lot of my friends, pretty much everyone I knew in college, was working to go and get a job at a big company somewhere, and I was not, and I wouldn't come to the career fairs and do all the things that they were doing, and they thought that was weird, and it was weird. I thought I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I survived as a broker. It was challenging, but that was kind of the ultimate test, I think. It's definitely not structured.
The broker world, if I try to I've never worked in the broker world, but it's pretty much, you only get compensated for the deals and the value that you create, right? You don't you don't have a baseline salary that covers your living. It's all about the deal, right?
Yeah, totally. And I couldn't have done that if I didn't have a very supportive family who wanted me to, chase being an entrepreneur and see how it went. And it's really challenging. I don't know how a lot of people make it those first few years, because you really do just kind of eat what you kill, and it's tough.
That's a good point. There's so much security, even if you don't get $1 from, say, family and close friends that are willing to support you if you're going to be an entrepreneur. Just knowing that you have a safety net behind you, that you will have a place to sleep and a place to eat, even if you were to fail, is such a massive advantage.
Oh yeah, it's an incredible privilege, and I'm well aware that most people don't have access to that. And it's, it's very humbling to remind myself that even on tough days, it's incredible just to have that opportunity and to have a family that'll allow me to do that.
I had a solid family foundation behind me, even if it didn't equate to an equity investment or anything like that, but just the safety net and the knowledge and the exposure, because I saw what an entrepreneurial life looked like. I saw what hard work looked like and all of those things. So forever grateful for that perspective.
Yeah, it's critical.
Moving into the investment strategy at Katz Development, you guys talk about high design differentiated projects and a focus on decarbonization. Could you expand on that for us?
Yeah, I mean, we're, like I said, a small development company. There's a lot of developers out here in Denver that are enormous, and they do things all over the country. And they've got a model and a very specific plan. We kind of think of ourselves as being a little more nimble, a little bit more opportunistic, possibly a little more willing to do things outside of the box that the larger players maybe don't have an interest in doing. The last thing we want to do is go and compete with them. And so it kind of forces us to get creative and forces us to differentiate both from a business strategy standpoint and also just a plain aesthetic and product standpoint. Real estate is obviously an investment, but it's also a tangible thing that people interact with. And we see value in being creative and doing things that other folks aren't necessarily doing or willing to do.
You also mentioned, and I'll take these quotes right off the website, build places we want to go, right? And I see you almost living that because you moved to the city that you wanted to develop in.
Where that came from is just, we see development as something that is not just a financial vehicle or an investment, but something that fundamentally changes cities for good or bad. And we see that as a pretty big responsibility. And so the way we approach projects is we're not necessarily looking at a site and thinking, I wonder what this demographic would think if we designed it like this, or I wonder if people would come to this building if we did it like that. And so we kind of start with the perspective of, is this somewhere that I would want to go? Is this a food and beverage outlet that I think I would go to if it were in this neighborhood? Is this a type of, multifamily that I would lease, I would go and live at if it were in existence? And so that's kind of the foundation of where we start when thinking about future developments.
It's a competitive edge, Andrew, because if I think intuitively, most developers are trying to think of what does their consumer, what does their tenant want? And you yourself are almost, you're developing for the tenant, but you relate to the tenant because you're thinking about what would I want in this building? What experience am I looking for at this stage of my life as a young professional? All those things. Return to form. How did we come up with the name?
The name took a long time, but, we wanted to do something different. The whole, just looking at it high level, this project in particular, everything about it was about differentiation. We're building in a very heavily developed neighborhood that's growing really quickly. There are tons of giant national developers building stuff all around us. And so from day one, the whole thesis had to be we have to be different. We have to differentiate both the product, we have to differentiate aesthetics, our business plan, all the way down to the name. And so, we're working with a phenomenal creative group called Wonderworks that's local here in Denver, that's been in the neighborhood for a long, long time. And they helped us come up with a bunch of different ideas. And we ended up wanting to do something that was more of a phrase and less of a traditional, everybody's seen the new multifamily buildings pop up in every city across the country over the last 10 years. And, there's always characteristics that draw them together that you can see across markets. And we just thought naming it something a little longer form more of a phrase would stand out. And then also it was the phrase itself was something that we could really latch onto as a design and development team throughout the design process of, hey, this name means something to us. We feel like, we're working with mass timber, which is a really old school building material that we've been building with wood for ever since we've been building
It's the
things.
newest old school product out there.
Yeah. And so, this isn't new. I mean, the way we're doing it is new, but wood is not new. And so we kind of wanted to remind ourselves as we're designing, as we're making decisions, that, hey, this is the thesis. We think that it's cool that we're returning to this real foundational way of building with wood.
We're returning to form. I like it.
Yeah. And it, has a lot of meanings to us internally. It doesn't necessarily need to translate to the consumer, but for us, it was nice to have kind of a central thesis, and
it's a part of the why.
Pillars. Yeah.
You mentioned a lot of, say, institutional developers, large scale stuff going on around you. Could you share where in Denver is this project? What neighborhood? And could you describe the neighborhood for us?
The area we're developing in is an arts district called Rhino, which is short for River North. It's located probably 1.5 miles northeast of the center of downtown, which is called Lodo here. That's kind of anchored by Union Station. And so it's a very historic area. It was previously industrial, a lot of warehouse spaces, access to highways. It's been a quickly developing neighborhood since early 2010s, probably. There were a few transformative projects back in that time that kind of kicked off several waves of both private and public investment. And so really today, cool. I kind of compare this area to like Denver's version of the Meatpacking District, or Fulton Market in Chicago, or maybe the LA Arts District. But it's just a really unique, vibrant, eclectic district that has a lot of really compelling features like location or proximity to downtown, light rail stations, new parks, new roads, amazing restaurants and breweries, hotels, office, multifamily, all the things you'd like to see in a neighborhood.
It's really rebuilding its identity over the last 10 to 15 years, it sounds.
Yeah, and it's historically been an arts district, and it's always a tricky subject because, it was historically an arts district because it was not a hotbed of development, and it was a place where artists could have space they can afford and be creative and freedom in that. And so, it's really important for everyone involved in the neighborhood to remember what the neighborhood was before we got here, and to, make it an inclusive place, or be as inclusive as possible as we all plan our different projects.
Awesome. And how did you come to acquire the site? And I guess I'll ask, when did you acquire the site?
So back when I was a broker, this was one of the, day-to-day things I got really excited about, was just being in the Rhino neighborhood as a consumer. It was where I was finding my new favorite restaurants. It was a fun place to hang out. It was new and buzzy and up and coming back in 2015. So, as a broker, I got all excited about that. I put this big map together where I highlighted every site that a developer had bought recently or that was a planned project, and just kind of detailed out what was ultimately going to get built on that site. And it created this big map of what Rhino could look like at full build, 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And so I kind of took that vision. Yeah, I took that map and I went to, a few other developers that I knew were interested in the neighborhood, and were, basically using that map to go pick off, hopefully, some off-market deals that hadn't been taken down yet, that this map was kind of giving the blueprint for where Brilliant. Good sites are. Because if you walk around on foot back in 2015, it's dirt roads, it's, you don't see all of the development hadn't started yet, and so it was hard to visualize.
There's dirt roads that close to downtown Denver?
I mean, pretty much, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and so, I used that map to parlay that into looking for some bigger sites for some bigger developers as a broker, and I came across this site that we ended up buying. It was too small for the clients I was working with, and I took it to Dad, and I was like, hey, I know it doesn't look like much today, but I know that this location is going to be something one day based on this map and based on all the activity going on and some stuff we knew was going to happen within the city in terms of some upzoning and some public infrastructure that was going in. And so, convinced him that we should make an investment in this, and it penciled back then for a 12-unit townhome deal. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of how we got comfortable with it, and we closed on it in 2017, I think.
Really cool. I want to applaud your thinking and your strategy. One, not only as a broker, but two, as a developer. You took the time and you looked very much long term. You almost drew up a master plan for the area without you didn't hire an architect, you weren't asking, but you really just sat back and say, what is realistic for this neighborhood to become over the next 5, 10, 15 years? I think that's a really unique way of approaching development, especially early on. I would absolutely applaud you for that.
Yeah. It wasn't me creating a master plan. It was me just seeing the plans everyone else was creating, because they were the true pioneers going in and buying sites in that neighborhood, but just drawing it out and just putting it on a map and saying, hey, this is all the stuff that's going on, because there wasn't really a cohesive way to see that. It was all just, you'd read an article, XYZ developer bought this site. They're going to build this kind of product. And there's buzz going on, but you don't really see the full picture until you put it on paper.
Hey everyone, quick break from the episode. If you're enjoying today's episode, please send this to a friend, like, share, comment, subscribe. It's the only way we're going to help more people. Let's get back to the show. Now, you acquired the site in 2017. On the financial side, the development pencils, the development works at 12 townhomes. Were you immediately thinking, I think we can develop a high rise here, or how did you get from that day in 2017 to where we are today, to where you're about to start construction on a high rise mass timber development?
Yeah, definitely didn't start as a high rise. For us, it was supposed to be a learning experience. It was going to be a fun, project to work on with Dad and with my brother, and really start the family side of the business out here in Denver. A bunch of stuff happened. So we bought the site in 2017. A lot of the public infrastructure work started to be announced from the city. For example, we're right adjacent to a big thoroughfare called Brighton Boulevard that the city ended up putting, I think, close to $50 million into rebuilding, with protected bike lanes, a nice new street lights. They put a light rail station about a 5-minute walk from our site. They upzoned our site from 8 stories to 12 stories. They announced a park that was going to get built 2 blocks away from our site. And then all these developers started putting very high density plans out for their sites here in the neighborhood. And there just became a point where it was no longer the highest and best use to do 12 townhomes. And so we started, opening our options a bit to see what really should be used here, because we had to maximize the site.
Is there an existing building on the site now that helps cash flow, or at least put a dent in the carrying costs of the land since 2017?
Yeah, a little bit. There's a little industrial building that we lease out. When we bought the site, we leased it back to the guy we bought it from for a little bit. Right now, it's leased out to several different groups for parking and for storage and a few other things. And it used to carry itself pretty well with taxes, but taxes in the area have increased pretty significantly over the last few years. And so no longer as comfortable, but, it's something.
When I try to put myself in the developer seat and thinking about, particularly in Boston, it seems like Denver might be a little bit faster and easier than Boston. It can be years of carrying costs that make it a challenge. So I'm always interested in the unique ways that people justify that or capitalize that or plan that out, because it seems like a critical thing. Development can be it is a very lucrative industry when done well, but the liquidity event is often years in the future. So the cash flow can be hard in the meantime. All right, so mass timber. So now you need the density. We're going to build a high rise. Was there an initial interest in developing with mass timber? What drew you to mass timber? Did you consider other structural systems?
Yeah. And just to backtrack a little bit, we still didn't arrive at mass timber or a high rise at that stage. So for just a bit more context, back in 2017, I left being a broker. I went to work for a company called Westfield Company, which is a developer, not the big mall developer, but a local Denver company that has a bunch of land in Rhino and in other parts of town. And a guy that I met when I first moved here, his name's Jonathan Alpert. He is a partner over there and one of the developers. And he had been my mentor kind of from day one. I met him when I was a broker. He really helped guide me towards this type of development. When I first moved here, I thought I was going to follow dad and build Chipotles out in the suburbs, which, would have been really fun. But in my personal life, I'm really passionate about design and art and creative kind of activities like that. And Jonathan opened my eyes to a type of development, urban infill development, that kind of allows me to pair that personal interest with my business interest. And so he kind of guided me as I was a broker. He helped when we bought the site, and then he brought me over to Westfield to work for him to get some development experience back in 2017. And so we had bought the site, we leased it back to the owner. It was carrying itself relatively, and I went to work for Westfield for 2 years, which was essentially like an MBA program. It was by far the most formative and crucial stretch of my, career at that point. Just learning from these people, and they're an incredible team. I'm very close with them still, and I see them around the neighborhood all the time.
What an opportunity. Could you share some takeaways from that time? Like, I know a lot of times, like, we can, especially when we're bullish or entrepreneurial and confident, you can go in thinking like, oh, I know everything, or I can figure something out. Like, what kind of stuff were like something that you thought to be true that you found out to be totally false, or any type of story you could share?
I mean, I don't know if I have a specific example, but I can tell you that I learned everything that I know today from my time over at Westfield. Everything from the city process to how to work with architects and contractors to how to look at a site, do feasibility studies, understand the financial viability, understand how to, create a really complicated spreadsheet and pro forma, and how structured finance works, and all of the fundamental things that, as a broker, I wasn't getting that in the weeds in terms of development. And so learning all of the fundamentals of real urban infill mixed use development here in Denver, and then also just getting to work on some really incredible projects that they had put together that I was really fortunate to be a part of. And that just learning by doing experience, it would have taken me 10 years to learn the amount that I was able to, just because of how I was able to be involved in every piece of the process with them.
That's an incredible opportunity. And you're right. I would even say the real estate development process, particularly in like urban infill inside of a city, is a totally foreign process. It doesn't align with like anything else that I've been exposed to in my life. So it is like a totally unique foreign thing. They don't teach you that in school. It's something you just kind of learn by doing and working in the field. Totally.
It's hyper specialized. It's a really complex process that has a million different moving parts. And it's cheesy and cliche and everyone says it, but like learning by doing is really, where I found my footing, and I'm still searching for my footing, obviously, but like that was huge for me at that stage, both from a confidence standpoint and just from a fundamental knowledge standpoint of how to get our family site going.
Return to form. We've got the experience, we've got the land, we're going to invest in this property and build some density in a growing neighborhood. Now I got to figure out what building I'm going to build. So you get to high rise. How do we pick the building system? Did you learn about mass timber during this process, or did you already know that you wanted to do mass timber beforehand?
Yeah. So, and I'll try and condense this, but it was a bunch of different variables that kind of came together for this. But when I was at Westfield, I was incredibly lucky to work on projects in Rhino that were unique and interesting. We did a music venue called Mission Ballroom with AEG, and it was a big ground up 4,000 person music venue that was somewhat of a cultural anchor to the neighborhood. There's amazing shows and acts from all over the world that come to play there, and people from all over Denver come to this venue. And I was kind of, really excited about the idea of development being something that adds to a neighborhood. And, there are plenty of examples of development that don't necessarily add to a neighborhood, but that are viewed more as financial investment, that you build it, you sell it, you move on. The impact to the neighborhood maybe isn't top of mind for everyone. And so that was kind of important from day one. It was really important from day one, as we wanted to do something that we thought would add to the neighborhood. And so we actually started as a hotel. That was where we went once I left Westfield in 2019, as we thought a boutique hotel at that location was something that would add to the neighborhood. It would add to the culture. It would add to engagement with people who already lived in the neighborhood. And so that was the path we went down for probably 6 months. Let's see, we got our initial concept approved by the city in like February, maybe the first week of March of 2020. COVID hit immediately after, and that kind of killed our hotel dreams. And so at that point, actually, mass timber was part of the plan. It was that we weren't very deep into it. We had very peripheral exposure to it. I looked at it a little bit when I was at Westfield for some stuff, and we just thought it was cool, but we thought we'd start there. And so the hotel got canceled.
Hard to argue that mass timber is cool.
It is cool, and we thought it was cool. We didn't know anything about it back then, and we're still learning, obviously, as we're going through this process. But so back in 2020, mid 2020, we canceled the hotel. We kind of had a few other ideas that we played around with in the hospitality world, and then we ended up pivoting to multifamily in early 2021. And the excitement for mass timber for us started to build because we recognized we were going to do multifamily. And again, there's so many units under construction in this neighborhood, and we're all about differentiation and how do we do something that adds to the neighborhood and not something that, capitalizes on the, coolness or the fact that it's a hot neighborhood at the moment for development. And for us, mass timber, we were introduced to it, I think, by our structural engineer, Greg Kingsley with KLNA, who's like the guru of mass timber, and we're lucky to have him here.
Yeah, he's an industry pioneer.
Yeah, he's great. He's also an incredible guy, but he walked us through a project he did down here called Plat 15, an office building built out of mass timber, and it just blew us away. And, we were like, okay, this is our aesthetic differentiator. We've been talking about differentiation. We very peripherally knew that we could build up to 12 stories out of mass timber. We knew that the 2021 IBC allowed for 3 new types of construction in Type 4B, or Type 4 rather, Type 4A, B, and C. And so we knew it could be done. It hadn't been done in Denver for multifamily or for anything in that high-rise category. And so we knew there would be some hurdles, but that's really where we started. We said, we're doing multifamily. It has to be differentiated. It has to be something that's going to add to the neighborhood, and mass timber checked a lot of those boxes for us.
Yeah, it sure does. And so it seems like as you got exposed to turning this development into a multifamily, you knew you needed to differentiate. And once you were exposed to a new mass timber building, you really fell in love, and that became your differentiator. Now, when you compare cost of building, because differentiators are great, but they still got to make financial sense, right? And sometimes the rub or the challenge that people have to get over is understanding how do we design and develop with mass timber efficiently, right? What in our process has to change from what we normally do with, say, concrete or steel or light gauge? Did you consider costs in this conversation, or was it like we need to design economically to compare with these other systems? We can't be too far off. What went through that thought process?
It was definitely the latter. Unfortunately, you can't start day one and say, we want to build a 12-story mass timber building. Somebody tell me what the cost difference is between that and a 12-story steel or concrete building. It's just, there's not enough information to get there. And so,
what's the cost per square foot of this new building?
It doesn't, it's every building's custom. It doesn't work that way. And so, we were either too stupid or naive or just really wanted to do mass timber, but we kind of took that risk and said, hey, this is a central tenet from day one. We're going to put mass timber in to concept, and we're going to push it until we can't anymore. And so we started designing with timber. Well, the first thing we did was build our entire design and construction team around mass timber experience. And we felt that if we did that and we surrounded ourselves with experts, because we don't know what we don't know when it comes to mass timber, hopefully that'll keep us on the rails and keep us in a position to be efficient with our design. And it was. And, our design team has been incredible. And it was all about optimizing from day one to make sure this thing could pencil, because we knew that mass timber was going to have some sort of material premium to other construction types. And so that was important to keep in mind day one.
Absolutely. From my seat, you made a great decision in the sense of the importance of differentiating in your neighborhood, given the inflow of new units. So you wanted to differentiate. Mass timber is a great option too. From our experience in the studies that we've done personally, when we compare mass timber to high-rise concrete or high-rise steel construction, the economics are more or less in line with each other. There isn't necessarily one over the other. It kind of depends on how the building is designed for. You have to still design to the advantages of the structural system. So for a high-rise development, it can be economically viable to design with mass timber, just as every much so as a concrete or steel building.
Yes, and I didn't give us or our team enough credit in the beginning. We knew that we were lucky that Greg Kingsley and his team at KLNA, they performed this big life cycle analysis and case study on their Plat 15 building, where they compared the cost between that building as mass timber or, compared to if it were built out of concrete or steel. And they found that it was not a significant cost difference between those three systems. And so that, along with just having conversations with the team about that, essentially, gave us some confidence. We knew if we were building a 7-story building and it was multifamily, competing with lightwood frame, mass timber is never going to compete on price. It's always going to be, a far bigger premium than makes sense at that height. But at 12 stories, when the systems are limited to concrete, steel, or mass timber, we knew that it could be competitive as long as we designed to the advantages of mass timber. So from day one, we really started with structural and just starting with the grid. And our architect team, Trace Birds, did an incredible job of collaborating with both with KLNA and with Timberlab to allow the grid optimization and the optimization of wood volume to drive the design. And Trace Birds, as the architect, felt confident that they would be able to design around the parameters that optimization provided. And so it was a really collaborative effort, and we wouldn't have got there if we didn't have that sort of team mentality.
Well said. That's the perfect way to approach a new mass timber development, right? You have to establish the parameters. We have to define the variables and then solve the rest of the development puzzle around there. So kudos to the design team. And it seems like, so you worked with Timberlab as your development partner?
So Timberlab is more of a mass timber consultant. They do engineering work, they do procurement, install, they do CNC customization of the timber panels and columns and beams as they get delivered from the manufacturer to our site. They're really our timber experts. And, from the top down, our team looks like Trace Birds, which is our local architect. They're phenomenally talented when it comes to aesthetic differentiation and product differentiation and sustainability and passive design principles. And I just really enjoy working with them. And then working with KLNA as our structural engineer, who has a tremendous wealth of mass timber experience, as you know. Timberlab, and then Swinnerton is our general contractor that we've been working with in this pre-con phase, and they have a tremendous amount of mass timber experience and a lot of conviction behind that construction material. And then working with AREP on various other things, fire protection, MEP consulting, and they also have been incredibly additive when it comes to the timber conversation, specifically around fire, and conversations with the city of Denver and the building department. So really built the team around mass timber experience.
Things that you were concerned about heading into developing with we already established that it was an old building type, but let's say a new building method. Were there any other reservations or risks that you saw early, and have you been able to put those to bed by this time?
Yeah. There were a ton of hurdles and risks involved that some of them we knew about as we started, some of them we didn't and are facing now. The big one for us, which we were thankfully able to get over, was the exposure limits related to building with mass timber up to 12 stories. And so just super high level, the IBC in 2021 that really brought mass timber into the building code for the first time. It's broken into 3 different types of mass timber construction. I'm telling you things you already know, but type 4A, B, and C, and it kind of goes in heights. So type 4A is up to 18 stories, B is 12 stories, C is, I think, 8 stories, or maybe 85 feet. And so the way that they kind of tried to be conservative with the code was that as you increase in height, you are required to cover more of the wood with non-combustible materials out of an abundance of caution from a fire safety standpoint. And so in type 4C, it's the least restricted because it's the shortest building. You can expose 100% of the cross-laminated timber panels in the ceiling. As you go up to type 4B, you're required to cover 80% of it. You can only expose 20% of that CLT. And then up to 18 stories in type 4A, you have to encapsulate the entire building. And so you, as a consumer or a end user, would have no idea that the building was built out of timber. It would just be covered in drywall.
And as a developer trying to create differentiation using mass timber, that becomes a hurdle at 12 stories, right?
Huge hurdle. Yeah, it wasn't going to make sense for us to build 12 stories and cover 80% of the wood for 2 reasons. One was for the aesthetic differentiation, and 2 was, at first we got into mass timber for the aesthetics, and then we started learning about the environmental impacts and just how, impactful the construction industry as a whole is on carbon emissions. And it defeated the purpose to work with a renewable resource like wood and something that sequesters carbon and traps it for the life of the wood, and then to cover it with non-reusable, non-recyclable materials. It just it didn't make sense for us. And
I never thought of it from that angle. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's defeating on the environmental standpoint. And so that was a huge hurdle. We knew we were going to have to either get a variance from the city or we could have to figure something out. And so we were fortunate enough. Greg Kingsley connected us with a group of mass timber experts, architects, fire protection engineers, mass timber advocates who had created the 2021 tall wood codes. And they told me that they had a proposed amendment to the 2024 IBC on the table. They had done a bunch of fire safety testing out in Sweden to prove that wood could perform at levels that it wasn't necessary to cover 80% of it up to 12 stories. It was overkill. It was preventing development in that range. And it was preventing development of mass timber in general because, again, if you're building multifamily and you're building under 7 stories, which is a lot of multifamily, mass timber is not really a financially viable option. And so, office is one thing, but multifamily really only makes sense once you start to get up in that high-rise building typology because it's going to compete with concrete and steel, but not light wood frame. And so, they had this amendment proposed. I called them. I said, hey, we're trying to build a 12-story building. We need higher exposure limits. They asked us they said, can you be on a plane to Pittsburgh in a couple days? I said, sure. And so I went to Pittsburgh with them. I had no business being there. It was the International Code Council I think it's on a 3-year cycle where it introduces new codes and amendments and changes and stuff to the International Building Code. And
That's pretty cool.
They asked me to be there and to prepare a little speech with them just from the development perspective of why I'm in support of this amendment that they created that would increase that exposure limit up to 100% in type 4B. So the final goal in their proposal was to be able to build high-rise buildings up to 12 stories and not have any restrictions in terms of covering the wood ceilings. And so I went out there with them, again, had no business being there. These are all absolute code experts, architects, I'm just here because I think mass timber is interesting, and I think it's a better way to build, and I think that it should be more prevalent. And so,
Which I think probably made your perspective that much more, gave it more weight in that conversation, right? Like you shared an angle that no one else there was thinking about.
I don't know. I think everyone there was really focused on safety and data, and luckily the fire tests that they had done provided a huge wealth of data that proved without a shadow of a doubt that the wood could be exposed. But I was, for me, it was just really interesting and fun and amazing to connect with these folks who are just absolute experts in the field, and I'm a total newcomer and trying to learn it better. And so just having that experience of being there with them and seeing them get that code amendment passed
Very
at
cool.
the IBC level, they were successful. And so, we took that win to the city of Denver and we said, hey, this is going to come down the pike in 2024. If we adopt the 2024 IBC, we're asking you to adopt this specific provision early, ahead of time, because we want to use it for our building. We want our mass timber development, and it's already been approved at the IBC level. And
Amazing.
Luckily, the city of Denver was incredibly supportive, and I think they all want to see mass timber become more prolific. It just really aligns with Colorado's environmental goals, and just the general idea of mass timber really makes sense here in Denver. And so
Totally agree.
they supported that and agreed to adopt that provision early. And so now I think Denver's one of the first, if not the first city in the country to allow you to build up to 12 stories and expose 100% of the wood.
Wow, I had no clue that you were involved in that meeting at the ICC. I knew, so what Andrew's alluding to in IBC 2024, that most places that's not even like released yet, is permitting fully exposed ceilings, right? The CLT, the ceilings in a mass timber building up to 12 stories, which you're able to adopt early for your development. I think that's incredible. And I think it's an exciting move for the mass timber wave as supply continues. It's going to open up an entire range of multifamily development between that 8 and 12 story range, where mass timber makes more and more sense financially.
Yep.
And you still get to gain those other advantages of the exposed timber. So it's going to open up a lot of development opportunity.
Exactly. That's the hope, is that people start to realize that. I think there's a lot of, either fear or just misunderstanding about mass timber within the development community, and people typically don't even know that you can build a high rise out of mass timber these days. And now with this new code amendment, if you're building between 8 and 12 stories, instead of just considering concrete or steel, you really ought to be considering concrete, steel, and mass timber, because it's got to be cost competitive, most likely.
Yep. And we're seeing the same trends. And I would say over the next 5-10 years, mass timber is going to be as prevalent as wood and as steel and concrete buildings. It really is.
I really hope so.
To wrap up here, do you have advice for others looking to develop in mass timber?
I'm definitely not in a position to give much advice. We're still figuring things out every single day on this, and just hoping to get this one out of the ground soon. I would say, if I were pressed on it, surround yourself with experts, work with consultants and designers and builders that have dealt with mass timber before. There are a ton of nuances to it that are different than concrete and steel and other construction types. And it's a different design process, a different procurement process. The schedule looks different. You might be shocked by the material price of timber up front when compared to concrete or steel, but there are other factors that you have to weigh that bring the price down and become more competitive, such as speed of construction and lack of finished material. There's acoustic challenges to deal with. There's, a whole host of things. You have to take advantage of the time savings, and so you have to be really dialed on your logistics plan. And
those are all great points. And despite that headwind, I'll call it a headwind, because there's a learning curve, there's a headwind, there's nuances.
Yeah.
There's less suppliers in the industry. Despite all of those, you still support like the mass timber movement. You would develop again in mass timber.
Oh yeah. This is the hardest part. If we get this one done, or when we get this one done, we're going to have a whole list of things we would do differently on the next one. And hopefully, it makes it easier for others who are interested in mass timber, but don't necessarily want to be first off the ledge, which is totally fair. And the way we looked at it is, it is a different process. It's a different team that requires different skills and expertise. And if you're talking to a developer who's been building with concrete and steel for 30 years, it's a really tough sell to go to them and say, hey, you should consider blowing up your entire team, rebuilding it, trying something new you've never done before, because, it has X, Y, and Z benefits. They're going to look at you and say, why would I do that? It's too much risk. And so from our perspective, this is our first project as Katz Development. Really, we don't have an established team here in Denver that we had to blow up. We were starting from scratch anyways. And so we had the advantage of not dealing with that hurdle. And so, we feel like it's really important for us to master this and to understand it, because we think it's going to be really important for the construction industry moving forward. I mean, buildings are responsible for something like 40% of global carbon emissions. And of the main construction types, mass timber is the only one that really provides a reduced amount of carbon emissions if done properly when it comes to construction. And so we just think, as we deal with this climate crisis that we're dealing with, the construction industry is going to have to step up, and hopefully mass timber is going to have to become more prolific, and we want to understand it.
That's perfectly stated, Andrew. And something we align with is getting exposure and the experience and getting through the learning curves now is going to be such a big lever over the next 5 to 10 years. It really is. Both in one, the direct experience, but two, just the relationships that you build across the industry and the knowledge that isn't necessarily known to the masses yet, I think is so important.
Yeah, that's the hope. And that's my advice, is to surround yourself with experts, because you don't know what you don't know when you first start with mass timber.
The top book or podcast you'd recommend to our listeners?
I'm reading a book right now that I love, and I'm kind of forgetting the name of it a bit, but it's Rick Rubin's book. I think it's called The Creative Way of Being, maybe. But it's all about creativity, and he, of course, is one of the most creative forces out there. And so it's just a really, really fun read into the gateway of how he approaches different projects. And I think creativity is so important in every industry. And I look at development, of course, things have to make financial sense, but I think that where a lot of people maybe don't put as much value in is the creative aspect. And I think that that's very important. And so I'm always interested in learning about other people's creative process.
Great recommendation. Creative is absolutely a differentiator. And last question to close out today, best advice for emerging leaders?
Same answer as before. I'm in no position to be giving anyone advice because I'm still figuring out what I'm doing. But I will say that the best thing I ever did was go and work for another incredible developer that was doing projects that I wanted to do. And to just align myself with a company like that, to learn and to experience it firsthand, it kickstarted me a long way. And so if you're interested in development from any perspective, I think going and working for somebody who's doing what you want to ultimately be doing is the best investment in your knowledge that you can make.
And like you said, in your experience, you feel like you've got 10 years of knowledge that were crammed into 2 years at that company. So
maybe I still don't know what I don't know, but I definitely learned a lot. And I certainly wouldn't be able to have pushed this return to form project to this point if I hadn't had that experience.
Perfect. Yeah. You got to immerse yourself in the environment that you want to grow in. So I think that's fantastic advice. Andrew, I wish you and everyone at Katz Development nothing but success in this monumental project, the tallest mass timber building in Denver. We wish you well. Thanks for joining us on Design Development. Hi, everyone. Real quick before you leave for the day, if we could ask one favor. If you enjoyed today's conversation, if you're enjoying all the conversations on Design Development, please share this with someone that you think will benefit from it. Our goal is to help as many people in the design, development, and construction industries. And with your help, I think we can spread the word and help more people. Thanks for tuning in, and can't wait to hear from you next time.